Before we start today's interview, I wanted to do a little bit of a caveat as we are now entering the back half of this season. This has been a long-planned series on racial trauma. Most, if not all, of these episodes were recorded before the recent racially motivated mass shooting traumas that occurred in both Buffalo and in Orange County, California, and in many other places that maybe we don't even hear on the news. I would highly encourage you guys to tune into these episodes, listen to these people who may look different than us, because praying and thoughts are awesome, and God can change this, but He uses His people to do it, and so we must be the change. And so before you are tempted to peace-fallow these next interviews as the month of June, as we are covering racial trauma, please know that these episodes were recorded before said mass shootings, but the mission is even more important now. So, this is the beginning of our series on racial trauma. Change. It is a complete sentence, and one that one of our guests today brought to my attention. We have heard all the variations of be the change, but what if? What if we just changed? Hey everyone, and welcome back to the donor-supported Wednesdays with Watson podcast. This project has a mission, and that is to help provide hope for people navigating the roads of loss and trauma and all of its friends. We do that by dropping these episodes every 2 weeks. So if you're not subscribed, first of all, welcome to the podcast. And I would love it if right there when you're in your app, you would subscribe and follow the podcast. Ratings and reviews also help get the word out if you're so inclined. But this is the real fire in my heart, guys. We have a mission to fund pro bono counseling for trauma survivors who need support. If you would like to join our mission, simply click on that Contact Amy button in the show notes. Now that we got all that out of the way, let's step in to the healing zone. Do not skip the rest of the intro. It's important. Change. It is a complete sentence, and one that one of our guests today brought to my attention. We have heard all the variations of be the change, but what if? What if we just changed? I am excited to bring two of the smartest people I know to the Wednesdays with Watson podcast. I met, and I'm air quoting that because we've never actually met in real life, Tiffany and Malikia on Clubhouse. And we can often be found in those Clubhouse streets, as Tiffany says, pontificating on any number of issues from Jesus to not. One day I was on a stage with several people who did not look like me, and none of the people in the audience looked like me. It's common when I'm in rooms with these two, and I'm okay with that. Because you see, these two were blessed with way more melanin in their skin than I do with my family hailing from Germany and France. But I said something in that room, and it triggered everyone in it. All was well at the end of the day, but I felt horrible. I knew, even though I did not say that to trigger the room, I knew something. I knew that I had to change. We are in season 3, one that I have called Trauma, Spaces, Places, and Aces. For the back half of the season, we are focusing on trauma in the home, and in particular, trauma in childhood. I knew that Tiffany and Malikia could bring value to the podcast, and I've really struggled with this episode in so many ways with what they'll do today, because you see, what they're doing today is the polar opposite of bleeding on those that did not cut them. I wanted to know what unique trauma occurs, particularly in the Black community, though we will be talking about Black, Indigenous, and people of color all throughout this episode. Also not wanting to make them my professor, I was hesitant to ask either one of them to do this today. But true to who they are and true to who I know them to be, world changers, these girls are world changers. They both agreed to come onto the podcast and help those of us who did not grow up in the Black community. They're going to help us gain a little insights about what their realities were like and maybe are still true today. Although, if I know both of these powerful women, they are actively changing the narrative in their sphere of influence, and they both have it, and we're going to highlight it at the end, and I have a surprise for both of them at the end. So, let's drop into this conversation with my friends, Malikia and Tiffany. Welcome, Tiff, the homie countryman, and Malikia Courtney to the Wednesdays with Watson podcast. I am so happy you're here.
Yo, what's up, Amy? What's up, big sis?
Not much.
Hey, little sis, and hey, Amy. I'm glad to be here with you, ladies.
Well, Malikia, welcome. Tiffany has been on the podcast before, and so those of you who are listening, you can back up, and she came on and talked to us about spiritual abuse. But I love you both, and I can't wait for this announcement at the end of this, and so I'm super excited. So let's dig in. So I explained to the listeners, and I hope that y'all know how grateful I am that the two of you would come on this and talk about traumas that are unique in your community, particularly what we call adverse childhood experiences. And my listeners know what that is because we've already talked about that. And I asked both of you if I could run the 10 common adverse childhood experiences by you. And all you're going to say is yes or no to me. And then we'll continue the conversation. And so we will start with any, mini, money, mo. Let's start with Malikia. Okay, so
I have a story about that too. Just remind me about the any, mini, money, mo. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm sure you do. You got all kinds of stories. I can't wait for people to go to your platforms and all that stuff. So adverse childhood experiences, these are recognized by all the major psychological books and all the things. These are the 10 most. And so all I want you to do, Malikia, here when I ask you is just yes or no for me, okay? So this would have been before your 18th birthday. In your home, did you experience physical abuse?
Yes.
Did you experience sexual abuse?
Yes.
Verbal abuse?
Yes.
I have a hard time getting through these with my friends. Physical neglect?
Yes.
Emotional neglect? I'm going to answer yes for you on that one. A family member who is depressed or diagnosed with other mental illness?
Yes.
A family member who is addicted to alcohol or another substance?
Cigarettes, if that counts.
A family member who was incarcerated?
No.
Okay. So remember this number. I'm holding it up to you. I don't want the listeners. Okay.
Gotcha.
All right, Tiff, your turn. Ready? Physical abuse.
Yes.
I love y'all. Sexual abuse.
No. This is inside the home?
As a child.
Oh, yes.
Verbal abuse.
Yes.
Physical neglect.
Yes.
Food insecurity would be one of those. Emotional neglect.
Yes.
A family member who is depressed or diagnosed with mental illness.
Yes.
A family member who is addicted to alcohol or another substance.
Yes.
A family member who is incarcerated.
From time to time, yes.
Okay. So both of you have what we call an ACE score of 7. And after 3, it is assigned toxic stress to you as a human being, and your brain remembers these things. I did a solo episode at the beginning of the season explaining the adverse childhood experiences. Experts agree that a score larger than 3 can and often does and create toxic stress, and then just put whatever you want in there. But I want to validate for both of you, your experiences is not just bad days, but about a traumatic childhood that you both endured. I have an ACE score very similar to yours, and I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So let's get started with the racial trauma portion of the conversation. As of the recording of this podcast, we are in February of 2022, and we didn't get our stuff together because I really wanted to drop this in Black History Month, but it's going to be closer to Juneteenth. We were all, this morning, I guess it was actually yesterday afternoon, I was so pleased with the federal verdict of Ahmaud Arbery. Those dudes are going to spend 2 life sentences in prison. In so many ways, though, the string of racially motivated violence opened the eyes of many of us. I'm not proud of that, but I also don't plan to waste what I'm learning And I say that because I will always be learning, not just about race relations, but about life in general. That being said, I would like to remind everyone what trauma is. Trauma is anytime our brains are pushed outside their window of tolerance. We talked about the window of tolerance in the solo episode as well as with Jeremy Fox, who is an EMDR consultant. So those are past episodes. But essentially, guys, trauma is anything when our safety is compromised or our felt safety is compromised, and any event that causes us to live outside of our brain's happy place. Lots of sciencey things I can say here, but that has been covered, and those direct links are in the show notes. With that said, Malikia, you had an ACE score of 7. Would you be willing to share any portion of childhood trauma that is unique to the Black community for our listeners?
So, and I love the question. There were so many things that flashed to mind, Amy, with that question, but I think a great place to start, and especially because of I have a talk that's coming up about this, we're having a conversation on hair trauma. Something so simple. The majority of us run around with hair, right? And hair care always comes into question when it comes to Black community. I remember growing up and being told, oh, you have good hair, or this person has bad hair, right? And even with my good hair, I still had to sit through one of the most strangest practices on the planet. It is fun, the girls do it and we enjoy it. However, when I was a kid, I was not a fan. I was not a fan of perms. For one, they burn. To sit in what I consider physical effing torture. You're putting this creamy crack on your head, and it has to sit there for a certain amount of time to process to the politeness that is preferred. And while you're enduring this, like literally you're damaging half of everything. And I remember walking away with scabs and scales and things like that. Oh yeah, girlfriend. So, and it's
listeners can't see what I just did. I was just, I'm horrified.
These are just the simplest of things. And I choose that starting point because it's such a broad stroke when it comes to Black girls.
Mm-hmm.
And the industry, society, school, place looking a certain way, the white way. I need to have more white. How much of my hair is freaking curly? And
it's
you can get through with a
gorgeous,
comb or a brush. Not now because I'm lucky. However, thank you. And those were some of the things that I recognized as a child, to the point where I verbalized to my mother. So let's push it a step further. From the perms, my mom was educated, beauty, the whole nine of this. And so she understood the extensions. That was her thing. You know, my hair was already shoulder length. She wanted it a little bit longer. So she would throw these things in here, ponytails, blah, blah, blah. And mind you, I looked gorgeous and I was happy. I was like, okay, I look good. I looked the part. I'm acceptable. Right? There came a time where we changed areas. So we moved to what I call hell, politely. And while we were living over in hell, I, of course, attended this neighboring school. And in that school was a hodgepodge of humans. A lot of them whose parents did not engage in those beauty practices, who did not engage in, my mother was insistent on us speaking English, blah, 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 less slang, right? Did not engage. So I was out. And to fast forward it and not take all day, because there's other questions to get to, there came a point where I was attacked by over 60 kids. And it was, she thinks she's white. She thinks she's cute. I wouldn't say yes to being a girlfriend of this rat-tastic little boy who was disgusting and stupid. We say that kindly. Just either how, as a result of that, he enlisted a couple of the boy girls to, and it ended that way. And I mean, 60 hands-on experience, and there was hundreds of people around. So I had not only my weave pulled out and paraded and waved and hit with it, but my hair pulled out too. So there are things that my Caucasian brothers and sisters will never understand.
No, and I think, first of all, I just want to say I'm so sorry, because again, the point of this podcast, because when you're a child, and in this series we are talking about childhood trauma, when you're a child, not only did you experience physical pain and shame and embarrassment and all of the things. Girls, your hair, your looks is kind of your thing. And so then you begin to and I'm not placing this on you, Malikia. I'm wondering, did you at any time become bitter or wish that you were white or wish that you had hair that didn't need that? Because what makes me sad as a child experiencing that trauma is so much of our identity is in our hair and in our looks and all of that. And so then it becomes like this highlight, this really, really important thing. And then it turns into you being physically assaulted and shamed, quite frankly, by your peers. And so I'm wondering, did that play into later in life? Because we are somewhat addressing this season how childhood trauma affects us later in life. When later in life, because and I will allow we can talk about this before we give the same question to Tiff. So I'm wondering if some of that unique trauma, and that's a great example. And I'm going to pop a question down to Tiffany on this in just a second, but. So I guess the question is did that experience carry over into adulthood for you?
I would say, so to move through a few questions that you asked, I was a child. There was no point where I even understood that I could have the option of waking up any other color than I was. Love being Black. So for me, it never went to, oh my God, I want to be white. No, it went to, I want to move back the hell up out of this grungy ass neighborhood and live, right? So
Yeah.
those were the thoughts as far as trauma carrying over into adulthood, of course, because I just gave you a coin. If you have 100 coins in that dollar, consider life spanned out. It continues. Racism has not stopped. The way I am received on sight will always be through this lens. So until the day I expire, love, in this body, I will always be a Black woman, right? I will always have that immediate judgment from the other side on how I look, how I present, how I speak, how I engage. And I don't even know if it's present mind judgments. I have my judgments too. I have my judgments on who I engage, how they speak, how they move in business, how they move in life. So I do believe that's a human condition. But as far as racism, it ain't went nowhere, if that's what you're asking.
And that's why we're doing this. That's why we're doing this, because
Yeah,
I want people to know. And so, Tiff, before I ask you the same question, you have a little girl who we call Tootie, and she's 6 or 7.
She's 7. She'll be 8 in June.
She'll be 8 in June. And so how did it feel to you just now when you heard Malikia say that? Not that clearly you knew you had that same trauma. I'm looking at both of you with your beautiful hair, and mine not so much right now.
Your hair is beautiful too.
Oh, your
hair is beautiful too.
I love you guys.
Absolutely.
So talk to me, Tiff. How did that land on your heart when you think of the context of you now raising a Black child and a girl at that? And so hair is a thing. Like, you know, white people for some reason are obsessed with Black people's hair and want to touch it, which is so offensive. And if somebody walked up to me and said, "Could I touch your hair?" I'd probably slap them. But how did that land on you for Tootie and helping her with something as unique as Malikia shared, that is unique to the Black community in terms of how you live your life and how God made you and how he made your beautiful hair and Tootie's beautiful hair? How'd that land on your heart?
Well, first, Amy, I want to say thank you for the invitation to join you on your podcast, and especially to slot me with my big sister, of whom I adore, admire, and appreciate for so many reasons. This particular point of trauma I have experienced myself personally, so it resonates with me very deeply, which is why I'm locked now and why my daughter is locked and will never receive a relaxer under my care and my dime. I too went through the burning of the scalp. When it rained on your hair, it had a certain smell. Your hair breaking off. Just all the different chemicals, the upkeep that you had to do, even moving to the hot comb that used to warm up on the stove. And your mother or your grandmother would take this iron comb that warmed up on the eye of a stove in the kitchen. And you would sit in the middle of the kitchen and you would bend your head down, and they would, no pun intended, grab those kitchens in the back of your hair. That's what we call the bally balls or the beady beads in the back of our hair, on the sides of our hair, our edges. It's kitchens. You got to grab those kitchens.
I did not know
If
that.
you didn't
That's
have
cool.
it grabbed with the hot comb, it was grabbed with a brush and grease. That was also painful because it's snapping your hair from its natural state to bend, to yield, to submit to a style that it was not created to do. So it resonates deeply with me. And like I said, I decided to lock up my daughter's hair at the age of 5. She was natural until then. And I decided to lock up her hair because that is our natural state, as natural as we're able to get it here in America, and us being Americanized. Of course, both my daughter and I, we are African American, so we're mixed a million times over at this point. But as natural as we can get it is in the lock style. She has the freedom to wear ponytails, bows, balls, barrettes, beads, whatever she can do. Her hair is just as versatile if it had been relaxed or pressed out, or if it was still in its original birth natural state. But yeah, it resonates deeply. It resonates deeply, and I agree, which is why we're sisters.
And it's just not something I ever would have thought of, ever. And so now, Tiff, can you think of another trauma experience in childhood that, and you didn't necessarily need to have experienced this. We are looking to highlight trauma in the Black community, particularly childhood trauma. So can you think of any other examples of a trauma that would be specific to your community?
For me, it would be boxing in or limiting our creativity. And when I say that, I mean this. My daughter, she's 7, as we already stated. And when my husband is not home, I allow her to scream. If she wants to sing a whole musical, if she wants to dress up in all her clothes, if she wants to do it, if she wants to paint, as long as she's not, painting on the walls or being just, out of pocket, I give her that freedom and that space to do so. However, for myself, and I'm sure some others and other generations, we were tamed. We were molded to be still, to be quiet, to not be in grown people's conversations. There are inappropriate conversations for children, but I allow my daughter to hear some of the clubhouse rooms, the crypto, all these type of things that I wish I would have known as a child, and as children, it sinks in. So for me, it was the taming of our innate. We're creatives we're just creative as Black people. I don't want to say that we're more creative than any other ethnicity or culture, but we definitely have some salt and pepper on our creativity. But because we have to move through society dumbed down, silenced, muted, crushed, our parents felt like it was their duty, it was a necessity to bend us into robots, to make us be quiet, to listen, to just say, yes, ma'am, no, sir. We wasn't allowed to question. We wasn't allowed to ask why. We couldn't even say what if our parents called our names. I remember the first time I heard a white kid respond to their mother with what, I almost passed out, because we weren't allowed to do that.
You got slapped,
we weren't allowed
probably.
to do that. Yeah, we weren't allowed to do that. I've heard white kids call their parents by their first names. Every adult that we came in contact with, we had to preface it with a miss or a mister. Why? Because they were afraid for our safety, for our life. So we had to be molded to operate a certain way. And what I have noticed is that it has messed up our creativity as a culture. We're not as socially inept as other cultures. We're very behind the curve on a lot of things because we weren't able to have the freedom to come into our own like other cultures have. So I think that's a huge childhood trauma that myself and many others have experienced simply because of the color of our skin. With our parents, with their good intention to help us to be able to exist in these spaces, but we have this residue that we have to deal with in the end.
So it's it's one of the worst things that you can do to a human being is take their voice away from them. right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
that's essentially what happened, and that's sad for me to hear. And I'm looking at two now. Malikia's kids are grown, but I'm looking at two people that have probably stopped this. And of course, she's got grandkids. She sent that beautiful picture yesterday to both of us. But y'all are stopping this, because this world needs creatives of all sorts. And I would go so far as to say that there is a special kind of creativity that comes from your community that no one else has. Listen, I am part of the Rhythmless Nation. You can give me a beat. I don't even clap in church because people look at me like, Amy, no, just no. And so y'all got the best music, y'all, you know what I'm saying? And so I think there's a lot to be said for that, but there's even more damage when someone takes your voice away. Wouldn't you agree with that, Malikia?
Absolutely. It's the convenience. It feels like who wants to honestly sit and have negative things highlighted about them?
Right.
Nobody, right?
Yeah.
And if you consider the positioning, if you consider the posture, and we'll jump back real quick to the eeny, meeny, miny, mo. It used to say,
I know what it
meeny,
said.
miny, mo, catch a N-word by the toe, right? So, and that's still a part of our culture.
And listen,
it's
a great example. I shouldn't have said it. I knew I'd heard it before.
Isn't it so subtle, Amy? Isn't it so subtle? And that's what I mean by it is the thread, is that needle and thread is sewn it up into a sheet, a blanket of fabric, however you want to call it. These are the little bits in life.
Yes.
And sometimes folks, I don't even know if it's really conscious, but it's heart, because the heart is pushing it forward, even if it's not forefront consciously intended.
Yeah.
Right?
Which in that case,
It's
for me,
still
like you guys know me, right? But I've been brought up,
yes,
and I fully admit white privilege. And for someone who was abused by a serial killer and beat up for 12 years, for the first 35 years of my life, with the exception of 4 in a children's home, to call myself privileged, that highlights how bad we have treated people of color. When you are hearing a trauma survivor like me, guys, serial killer, 7 sexual abusers, 12 years of domestic violence marriage, abandoned by my mom, and I am still more privileged than your community. I want to let that breathe for a second. Okay? So when we were in that clubhouse room, I made an assumption. I can't even remember what we were talking about, but I made an assumption that resources were not available to, I think it was a church conversation, that perhaps maybe the black church didn't have the resources that the white church did. And that wasn't offensive as much to the people in the room as much as something I said after that, which I'm not going to say again. But talk to me about, in both of your cases, because this is leading into the surprise that I have for both of you. Has counseling ever been part of your healing?
Tiff, you want to start and then I'll jump in?
Sure. Absolutely. Counseling is a major part of my healing. Even us sitting and talking together today, I consider it counseling. Why? Because the Bible says if 2 or 3 gather, they will be in the midst.
Amen.
And God is the great counselor.
Big C.
We are overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the words of our testimony. How can we share our testimony? We're not sharing our testimony to God. We're sharing our testimony to one another. But if you're speaking of professional counseling, absolutely. Absolutely. And what I have gained the most from professional therapy or mental health help is coping techniques. Mm-hmm. Because once we understand that trauma is eternal, it is embedded in our brains, in our bloodstreams, some impressions sometimes even leaving your muscles. That's how deep and serious trauma is. So I think it's this illusion that you can talk about it, cry about it, and you'll get over, and you're never triggered again. You'll never go through that same situation again. You won't come into contact with people that exhibit the same behaviors as a previous abuser. So what I've learned is coping techniques, how to deal with it, how to process it, how to not own it, how to let it go, how to breathe through it, how to journal about it, how to talk about it. Mm-hmm. I learned through professional therapy how to approach conflict. I was always on 100. I'm always in your face. You ain't gonna do me like this. I'm talking about at work, at church, in the home, because I don't have the anatomy to be fake. to be gaslit, and it just triggers me to no end because of a lot of previous trauma. So I had gone to a point to where I was just, I'm in your face, you're going to apologize, you're going to say this, you're going to do this. But with counseling and professional therapy, I've learned that sometimes it doesn't always require 100. Sometimes you can sit back and think maybe you misread something or you misunderstood something. So yeah, I am an advocate for counseling. It has played a major part of my healing.
How about you, Malikia?
I too am an advocate for counseling. I believe in that stuff. Like I believe it's going to rain during spring because it's necessary. And I will say that speaking from a trauma corner, we were raised, what goes on in the house stays in the house. You know, be quiet. You don't talk about this. Something comes up, we handle it in the home. So for me to move to a point where I actually chose counseling was colorful. It was a lot. It was a fight in itself to even reach for that help. And then too, what I also learned, exactly what Tiffany learned too, and I also learned it matters who you're getting your counseling from.
Yeah.
And my initial counselor was a Caucasian male. Nope.
Say more. Tell me more, because I want our listeners to hear. Tell me a little bit more.
He, for a person who's supposed to understand boundaries, he did not keep those boundaries. He was definitely out of his place and out of his mouth. And sadly, he could not relate. He literally could not relate. I'm sharing things with him, but his toolbox was not equipped for the life that I had led to that point. He was not able to give me anything more than the standard basics, right? And write about it, let's talk about it, square breathing, these very basic things. He was not prepared. And then even the outlook that he had on life, or understanding racism, or understanding what it is to be Black, not that he could understand it from the position of being in the body, but being able to empathize or sympathize or to understand, even have a clue. He was among the clueless. So, and it was my first, I was among the clueless as far as picking a counselor, right? So we both were two clueless people trying to figure it out, need to get help, him to get help.
I think you highlight something important there. There are resources out there, and I love it. It is actually the American Foundation. Now, this is for suicide prevention, but they deal with all of it. And I'll put this in the show notes, but this organization is only for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and they provide resources to those communities as it pertains to trauma and all the other things. When I was leading into the mistake I made on Clubhouse when I said that, my assumption was your churches did not have the resources to do whatever it was we were talking about. I don't want to assume, but I do want to ask you guys. So we know, obviously, in the poverty-stricken community, white and Black, but we're talking about the Black community right now, that those families cannot afford counseling. How accepted, I guess, is it, though, for the people that can, so upper, lower, upper middle class, whatever, people that can afford in the Black community to go to counseling? Is there a stigma like there is in our community when you go to counseling?
Yes. Like I mentioned before, we're raised with a set of beliefs and behaviors. And let me say this, too. There are some. We cannot take a blanket and throw it over everybody. Right. We can't do that. So I would say, from my experience and those that I've engaged, and I will speak of my engagement, my engagements have reached 174 countries.
Wow.
Okay. So my engagements are vast. So I can't say all, but I can say that many were conditioned to be silent, to not speak, to deal, to cope, and not seek help. So that is the story of so many people, sadly. And again, I know it's heavier in Black community, though I am aware that it exists in white community as well.
Right. You're so sweet to try to step into my world. This is about yours. Tiff, tell me, let's say you have 10 kids in your youth group. As a result of, and I really want to be careful the way I word this, as a result of just the lack of opportunity, okay? Because if you take Amy and you take Malikia or you take Tiff in 2022, I don't have to work as hard for things as you do. I just don't. That's the reality of it, period. We call that white privilege. It's real, all of that. But Tiff, and so say, because you're a youth pastor, and this is why I wanted to ask you this, say you have 10 of your kids in your youth group. What percentage of those would you say would struggle to be able to afford to go to counseling?
Here's the thing. Okay, you want a technical answer for my...
Not necessarily. Okay. I don't want to make
let me know what you're looking for.
I don't want to make the assumption that most Black homes cannot afford counseling. I don't want to make that assumption.
Yeah, don't make that assumption, because even if it's not coming from income from a parent, household income, okay, and it's a job, child support, Social Security, okay, there is all type of resources for children in lower income households. So where I live, there's Medicaid, there's CareSource, there's Buckeye health insurance. There's all different type of insurances that children, all you have to do is apply and you're automatically covered, healthcare wise, mental care wise. So for my children, it would be like a case where maybe it's a foster child and they're not properly registered, their paperwork hasn't kept up with them, or a homeless child that doesn't have any type of registration or anything. I know we have refugees sometimes that haven't registered at the Catholic Church yet. It will be specified cases like that. But 9 times out of 10, our children in our communities are insured, because that is a resource that the community and schools make sure that the children take part in. So I would say that our children can afford mental health resources.
Okay. Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. And I know that's not true everywhere, right? And both of you, and I'm going to give both of you airtime because you both have platforms, and I want my people to know what you're doing, what your passions are, and all of that. Before I do that, though, I want to make an announcement to my listeners and to both of you. Ready?
Ready, set.
All right. So my heart here today is broken in some ways to hear some of the things that, and I know that I got like an iota of what children in the Black community experience, whether it's inside the home or not. I know I only got a little piece of that, and my heart already hurts. And so I want you both to know, for 2 people who I've never met, I just love you both. And so this is also an announcement to my listeners. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is a donor-supported podcast. To do that, I needed to create a 501c3, which I'm in the process doing. We're going to call that Joel 225 Ministries. I have a goal, guys. I am 50 years old, so this is a very, very, very lofty goal, to raise $1 million before I die for pro bono counseling. And today I am awarding 2 scholarships, the Malikia Courtney and the Tiffany Countryman scholarships, to both of you to be used when somebody comes in your purview that cannot afford counseling, black, white, yellow, unicorn, gay, straight, whatever. You will forever, in Joel 225 Ministries, have the Malikia Courtney Scholarship and the Tiffany Countryman Scholarship. And when you come upon people who cannot afford counseling, all you have to do is send them to me and say, please use my scholarship money. And I want you both to know, I only awarded 1 scholarship before the 2 of y'all, and it was to the person that took me to the psych ward that saved my life. And that's how much I appreciate what you've done here for us today. And so, as I mentioned, I know you're both speechless, which is also fun because I have not seen that very often.
It's so amazing. Like, I don't want to talk over you because I know you're
Go
recording.
ahead. I'll let you guys respond to that. But so my 501c3 will be in place by the second quarter, and you both will be awarded with scholarships. I'll put some money in it. And then as we get donations, so far we only have 3 scholarships, and so that money will be put into those 3 scholarships, and you just send people to me when they need money for counseling, and we will take care of that.
This is amazing. Thank you. I'm honored. I'm humbled that this is something, because when you think of a 501c3, that's eternal. So to know that my name will be eternal in helping with mental health, that's I'm grateful. Thank you. I'll have more to say later.
Awesome. And Amy, I am as well just humbled and grateful. I appreciate you so deeply for even having the heart to do that. That's huge. And what I'd also share is I don't know if we even talked about this, but I do have a background in mental health and behavioral health modifications, also working in the prison systems, and then also handling sanctuary experience. I have a huge heart for mental health, and especially through the domestic violence train too. There are so many threads that I have and irons in those fires. This is amazing, and I come into contact with so many folks who need the help and need the love. And something you mentioned earlier, Tiffany, about there's a trauma being in the mind, it being in the body, to the fact we can find it in your muscles. What I do over at Sanctuary Experience, and I won't go into it too heavy right now, we literally walk women through releasing that poison. So, and changing their minds and changing their lives. So this is very huge, and I'm grateful that you did this, Amy. This is amazing.
Unfortunately, you and I share something pretty horrible in common, and that is domestic violence. And so one of the reasons why, because we're only awarding 5 of these scholarships for the first few years, and one of the reasons why, many reasons why, Malikia, I wanted you to have one is because I come across domestic violence survivors all the time who need help, who just can't help, who just can't afford it. And I was that, I mean, I could afford it, but I didn't get help, and my body kept the score, to your point, and to Tiff's point with it. We hold stress and trauma in our bodies, and I now have 4 autoimmune diseases. I don't want that to be the story of people that you come in contact with. And so this is a perfect way to segue out of the podcast, guys. I want you, listeners, I want you to pay attention, because the 3 of us, along with some people who I'm going to handpick from my community, these guys are going to handpick some people from their community, and probably sometime in the summer, we're going to do a video series on YouTube on this racial trauma. But I wanted to just lightly touch it today, ever so delicately, so that my listeners out there would understand that in the Black community and Indigenous people and Native Americans and all people of color have traumas that we never, ever, ever could understand. Now, with that being said, I do want to end the podcast by both of you talking to me about your mission. And so we'll start with Malikia, because you just were talking about Sanctuary. Tell my listeners a little bit about Sanctuary Experience and where they can find fast, quick information, because that's kind of coming up here in a couple weeks. Yeah. So tell us about it.
Close.
Yeah, tell us about it, and I'll provide lots of stuff in the show links for people to be able to get to you. But tell us a little bit about Sanctuary.
Awesome. And I receive your love and offer your love and light, Amy. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here with you. I love my Tiffany, so it makes it extra special to do this with you 2 ladies, because I love you all. Sanctuary. I created Sanctuary Experience to serve women globally who experience trauma and don't have a community to fall back on and be loved, who don't have a community to dig in their heart and do the work and pull that pain out and help them to heal. And April 8th through 10th, we're going to be doing our 3rd or 4th Sanctuary Experience, where we are taking care of the women and walking them through that. And don't worry, men, I am already working on XPM, because I was asked to, this Thursday, actually, 7:30 p.m., we're going to host a digital offering for the men to address their traumas, because I had guys that were abused, neglected, abandoned, molested, and raped all come to me and go, what about us? Yeah. So I am doing my best to serve.
So you do that all year, and you fundraise for it. Where can they find you? By the time this podcast airs, unfortunately for 2022, it will have occurred already. But that being said, tell me where people can find you. They can donate to your organization. This is something really close to my heart. Last year, it was in my area, and I was not able to make it. But especially for people that are early in their healing, it is an amazing opportunity for you to do the things like Malikia said, to work it out of your body, like Tiff said, to work it out of every fiber of your muscle, because the body does keep the score. And so where's the best place for them to find the most, like the fastest, most succinct information on Sanctuary Experience?
So that is going to be found at thereboundcoach.com/sanctuary, thereboundcoach.com/sanctuary. And we do Sanctuary. So with this particular coach, I host 4 a year. And if other coaches hear this and they want to provide a sanctuary experience for their community, I'm franchising out, teaching the model so that people can be helped globally. The mission is to have 1 million folks within 5 years that are a part of the community, active and actively loving one another, supporting one another, showing up. And of course, all my social medias are Malikia Courtney, with the exception of Instagram, and that's at Santa's Helper, SANTAZ Helper, HELPR. And find me there. Reach out to me, Malikia Courtney.
And I'll put link trees for both of you in the show notes. Do you know how long it took me to figure out who Santa's helper was? My Instagram is the only one that is different. But I kept seeing these posts for Santa's helper. I was like, who is that? Well, Malikia, I will tell you before we jump to Tiff real quick, for someone whose voice, like one of your most prominent memories was be quiet. We don't say that. We don't do that. That is unique in your community. I mean, we all, and I'm older than both of you, but we all heard children are to be seen and not heard. But I grew up in downtown Jacksonville, Florida. Many of my friends did not look like me. And so I heard exactly what you're talking about. So for somebody whose voice was taken, here you are on all the stages. You mentioned that you kind of slipped in there really quickly. You also have a book. I'll put that link in the show notes on domestic violence. Lots of my listeners are domestic violence survivors. And then, of course, we will be awarding the Malikia Courtney Counseling Scholarship, and that will happen sometime in April as soon as I get the 501c3 Joel 225 Ministries, which is going to be news to my listeners as well. And so, Tiff, so excited about that, and excited to hear how it goes in April with this group of women that you're going to have, and really glad that you're including men in that, because 1 in 7 men report being sexually assaulted. I would come to you and I would challenge that statistic because men just don't talk about it. And
that is true.
Yeah. And as a survivor of sexual abuse, I can say this with some authority. I have always said that I think that when boys, particularly children, are sexually abused, I don't want to compare how rough the goes are, but there's a lot of different things that go when men are abused. And so I'm excited to hear. And so people will be excited to follow that as you create the sanctuary experience for men. Well, that brings us to the homie, Tiff the homie. That's what we call her on social media. She is also a youth pastor. But Tiff, tell us, so you've got something really exciting going on right now because you are a playwright. And so talk to us a little bit about what you got going on. Again, by the time this airs, that this particular thing that I know you're going to announce will be over. I'll make sure that I have that on my social media and I'm sharing it as that gets closer as well. But talk to us about what you got going on. You've got a bunch of stuff going on, but tell us where my people can find you and all the things.
Yeah. Well, everybody can find me on at www.tiffanycountryman.com, or if you want to check out my nonprofit, www.ministryisme.com, and that's ministryisme.com. That's where all of my social media, you can find me. I got videos, everything on those 2 websites. I do have a stage play coming up in April, April 23rd, called Rona, the Aftermath, and it deals with African-American couples and the trauma that we endured during the 2020 pandemic, the shutdown, the shut in place. So that's going on in April 23rd here in Dayton, Ohio, at the Dayton, which I'm so excited about. Will you be there? Are you coming to Ohio?
I'm going to try. I don't think so. I want to. I have friends that live up there. Let me ask you this: are you streaming it? And if not, so, no. I know that's expensive.
We're going back to traditional theater.
Well, and I love it. I love it. Well, Tiff is a playwright. She does a lot, guys. If you are on the Clubhouse app, all of our usernames are just our names. I'm at Amy Watson Author. Tiff is at Tiff Countryman, and Malikia is at Malikia Courtney. All of this will be in the show notes. Guys, thank you. You have brought a perspective to the Wednesdays with Watson podcast, and we are going to deeply explore this in a different, because we want it to be interactive. We want to stream it. It's going to be video. None of us showed up for that today, except for Malikia showed up dressed for a video. So I love you guys, and I want to proclaim over you what I proclaim over everybody on my podcast. So Tiff, you get to hear it for a second time. You are seen. You are known. You are heard. You are loved. You are valued. I adore you. And today, what you guys have done is, like I said, the opposite of bleeding on those that cut you. I'm not saying that I cut you or that anybody listening to this cut you, but we're representatives of a society that is doing that actively. And what you've done here today has helped some people in my community and other communities understand. I never in a million years would have thought of something as traumatic as both of you explained as it pertains to hair. Something as simple as hair. And so, guys, as Phil Baker's song plays us out of the podcast, I'd like to thank both of you for being on the show. Either one of you have parting words for our listeners?
Thank you so much again, Amy. I really appreciate you as far as the listeners. Thank you for taking time to listen. And I do hope you reach out and engage. I am having a conversation on March 4th, Amy, and it is a digital conversation talking about hair trauma. It's going to be done poetically because I am a spoken word artist as well. So
make sure you let me know. Make sure you let me know when that happens, because all these things you have coming up to your episode, I will promote big time. Okay. And like the show I already have, and I will continue to, Tiff. But Tiff, do you have any parting words for the listeners?
I just want to tell everybody to be encouraged, to hang in there, and to not allow your past trauma to define your future situations. That you don't have to become a product of your past environment, but you can exist where God has you now. Allow your mentality to catch up with your blessings.
Oh my, allow your mentality to catch up with your blessings. I love that. And I love both of you. And so, listeners, thank you so much for joining us here today. I hope that you learned something. Please make sure that you're following all three of us, as we will be moving into the summer, diving deeper into this. If you need to reach me, you know how to do that. Just any number of ways. Just click that Contact Amy button. Again, would love it if you would consider subscribing and following and liking the podcast. We will be back in 2 weeks in the Healing Zone. Thank you both for being here with us today, and can't wait for us to continue to do more work together.
Let my life glorify you and teach me to walk beside you and how